Hello everyone. I know it's been a while, been pretty busy in real life to be honest. I've just entered into a amateur work tournament, friendly tournament, have a bit of fun and get back into chess. So this is an over the board tournament. Every week there'll be one game. It's a 10-minute each rapid game with 3 seconds per move. And every week I'll just be going over the games that I've played and talking about them. So in this first game I was black. And my opponent started out king pawn opening, led to some exchanges early on. I feel like my queen's in a really good spot in the center of the board, so I'm not too unhappy with the opening result. When my opponent brought his knight out, I wanted to pin it so I could later push my pawn up and get this bishop out without blocking in this bishop. I know I can move this up this pawn up 2 squares as well. But I wanted to get the bishop out straight away, just in case I only ended up moving that pawn up 1. So I bring the knight up, preparing to queenside castle. Okay, your bishop gets challenged. What should you do? Should you take the knight? Should you retreat? Or another move? Well, I didn't like taking the knight because then my opponent would take my bishop and then threaten my queen, gaining a tempo. I would then have to move my queen, giving my opponent time to castle, and then I'd be like 1 move behind. So in this case it's better to keep the bishop and just retreat. I've kind of forced my opponent to put his bishop on a pretty passive square, so bishop to g4 here wasn't worth it, even though I'm wasting a move coming back, preparing to castle. My opponent castles. I played this e5 first before castling, just because I realized if I were to castle, then my opponent could play d4, gaining space in the center, and then it's harder for me to play the e5 move. And then I'd be in this position where I'd be a bit more cramped. So noticing that my opponent chose to castle instead of playing d4, I took advantage and played e5 myself. Now this prevents my opponent from being able to play d4. So now my opponent is the one who has to play defensive in the center and only move his pawn up 1 instead of up 2, instead of me. So a good trick to remember, you always want to try, and if you can get into the center first and be a bit more advanced, it's normally a good idea. Now this bishop's restricted by its pawn, whereas my bishops are both free to roam around. So we'll see what happens. I bring my other bishop out. I still haven't decided where I was going to castle. I was planning to do queenside, but then I was keeping my options open because of my opponent's defensive positioning. I wanted to be able to change at any moment's notice. My opponent, good move, get the bishop out, try and exchange pieces when you're a bit more cramped. That's always a good strategy. He played really well. I decided to castle queenside and see what happens from here. So now, this normally would be a good move, challenging in the center and preparing d4, which would exchange a lot of things off and equalize the game. However, in this specific case, there's a tactical mistake with it, which I ended up spotting and taking advantage of. So it leaves this pawn here vulnerable. I've got 1, 2, 3 attackers, and my opponent only has 2 defenders. But notice, if I take it straight away, take, this is probably what my opponent saw. My opponent ends up a piece up. So he's trying to hold onto it tactically. So nice trap. Didn't fall for it because I realized, thinking for a while, I realized if I exchange first on e3, throwing this little in-between move, now I can go and take the pawn. Alright, so what's the situation now? So I'm a pawn up, which is this pawn here. Luckily that this knight defends that pawn, or my opponent could have taken this. So it worked out well for me. I've got an extra pawn. I've got a pretty active rook, which can obviously get chased away. I played the simple move here, just defending everything, restricting the knight, and freeing up my knight to be able to move. My opponent tries to swap off rooks, swap off my active rook, which is a good move. Can my opponent hold the endgame a pawn down if the rooks are swapped off and it's pawns and knights and kings? Maybe. I didn't know. I didn't calculate that far ahead. I only calculated this point where I'll get a pawn, and thought I'm happy with that. I played my rook over, so I didn't want to exchange rooks and give my opponent the file. So I decided, well, I will make the exchange on my terms, thinking that my opponent would swap, and then instead of my opponent having a rook here and me having a rook here, you can see that it's a much better version. My rook is in a strong center square. It's in my opponent's territory. It's threatening to come across here and attack the pawns. If the knight moves, it's threatening to come down here and attack those pawns. So I feel like you got to try and get every little advantage that you can. But my opponent, maybe under the time pressure, made a mistake here and played king up. Again, normally a good positional move, but in this case, it just loses a rook. Unfortunately, yeah. So now I'm a rook up. So now the position is definitely winning. How do you go about winning from here? What's the most efficient way? And you've got to be careful of not getting overexcited and then losing your advantage. So this is a good point to focus on. So now, how do you come up with a plan to finish the game off? Do you go for checkmate? Do you try and take all the pawns? Do you try and win the knight somehow? Well, in this case, I decided that a knight and a rook is going to be difficult to get a checkmate on my opponent's king. If my opponent's king was up, down here somewhere, and it was sort of trapped in a bit, I could potentially bring the rook back and go for a knight checkmate. But this just isn't the case. My opponent's king is very safe. Easiest thing to do. You don't need to calculate long variations. I've got a rook. Let's go for all the pawns that are weak. So I just attack pawns, take all the pawns, and then go for a queen. Then with a queen and rook, checkmate should be simple. So you'll see that's my plan for the next few moves. Opponent tries to save his pawns, check, and then I take, there goes one, pawn number one. Opponent tries to create some counterplay on this side of the board. I wasn't too worried because I've got a knight that can come over to defend if I need to, and I've got 4 pawns against 3. So even if he wins 1 pawn, it's still going to be even, and my rook can always eventually swing back if I had to. So I'm just concentrating on my task of taking the pawns and getting a queen. So obviously I have to take. Opponent saves the pawn, and I bring the knight over. So I didn't bring the knight over to the queen side. I already have a rook here. I need this knight here defensively. Look at this. I'm covering some important squares. I've got pawns and knights. That all these squares are covered. My opponent could try to bring the king all the way down to there and take that pawn, but then he'd have to go there and take that pawn and then try and get this down. It's a lot of moves. By that time, I'm just going to take this pawn and then go for a queen. So saving the pawns. Now, create a passed pawn. I'm going to go move this pawn up, create a passed pawn, go for a queen. Very basic objective, but it works. Notice I took with a pawn, not with a rook, because I want to create a passed pawn. King up, push my passed pawn. Okay, now this move here, if I push the pawn again, yeah, my opponent brings a knight over, I can chase it away, it's all good. But why not? Just go here, restrict the knight can't go to either of these 2 squares, and now it's just a matter of pushing. The king can't come back because this is all covered. Look at this power of this rook, it's restricting all my opponent's pieces. And my knight's restricting it from coming forward. So good balance between defense of the knight, defensive capabilities, and attacking capabilities of the rook. So it's important to coordinate your pieces well like that. So then I just end up pushing the pawn and queening. Simple as that. Now you watch how quickly it gets to a checkmate. So now I've got a queen. I pin the knight. It's pinned, so next move I'm going to win the knight. Now what do? Do I take the knight? Well, yes. In this case, I can take the knight. In the situation of, say if my opponent had played here, I don't know, just waste a move. And then the same position. If I were to take the knight here, that would be a huge mistake. You have to make sure my opponent has a free move, because otherwise this is actually stalemate. That's covered by the queen, and that's covered by the pawn, but my opponent is not in check. So that would have been a huge mistake. So always be careful when you're a queen and rook ahead, you're trying to win, be careful of the stalemate. The opponent will try anything. It's just lucky for me in this situation that my opponent played this move instead, and I had to double check everything and always check if your opponent has a free move, which they did. So take, only move, checkmate. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this game. I'll have the next one up pretty soon as well. Thanks for watching.